Welcome to Celebration of Nantucket Sound, our monthly webinar series, and thank you for joining us. I'm Audra Parker. I'm the president and CEO of the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound. For those of you who don't know us, we're a nonprofit organization based in Hyannis on Cape Cod, and our mission is the permanent protection and preservation of Nantucket Sound, which is the body of water that lies between Cape Cod and the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. And this is especially important because the Nantucket Sound represents a very unique situation where you have a split jurisdiction between state and federal waters. You have unprotected federal waters that lie in the center of Nantucket Sound, and then you have state waters that ring those federal waters that extend 3 miles from the shorelines of Cape Cod and the islands. So to address that situation and to recognize Nantucket Sound as one single ecosystem, the Alliance has been pursuing federal legislation to designate Nantucket Sound as a National Historic Landmark, which is the highest level of historic protection. And just to give you a few examples, the entire island of Nantucket is a National Historic Landmark. Wesleyan Grove on Oak Bluffs and the Vineyard is a National Historic Landmark, as is the Kennedy Compound in Hyannis Port on the Cape. So we've built a very wide and diverse group of stakeholders that support this designation, and this includes municipalities on the Cape and Islands, historic preservation groups, chambers of commerce, museums, and many, many others. And we are hopeful that this legislation, which is a federal bill, will be introduced in Congress relatively soon. So without going into more detail on that, I'm very excited to welcome our guest speaker tonight. His name is Robert Rocha, and he'll discuss marine and cultural connections between the Azores and Nantucket Sound. A few words about Robert and his impressive bio. He's the Associate Curator of Science and Research at the New Bedford Whaling Museums. His major responsibilities include developing all science content for museum exhibits and cataloging and managing the natural history collection. He's also the executive director of the Mass Marine Educators, chair of the education committee of the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium, and on the advisory committee for the New Bedford Science Cafe. Finally, Robert co-authored Emptying the Oceans, Summary of Industrial Whaling in the 20th Century. So with that, I welcome you, Robert, and I'm very excited to hear what you have to say this evening. And if the audience has any questions, you can submit them, and I will be back after Robert gives his presentation to facilitate a Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Audra, and thank you, Peter, for the invitation to do this. And I go by Robert, I go by Bob. Family calls me Bobby, all those things. But I'm happy to be here, and I'm going to pop my presentation up on the screen.
And I will get off so that you can be the star.
Okay.
That looks great, Robert. We could see the PowerPoint.
Fantastic. Okay, so what I thought I'd do to begin anyway is to take us on a little bit of a trip out of the harbor and, out of New Bedford Harbor, out of Buzzards Bay, and out past Nantucket and Nantucket Sound, and then we'll head off to the Azores. And then we'll talk a bit about the species that are shared in these two areas, both Nantucket Sound and the archipelago of the Azores Islands. And we'll also have a look at some entries from a logbook from a ship that sailed out that way about 120 years ago. Then, of course, there'll be questions at the end. So this image on the left here from mightyfish.com, all those yellow dots are spots for surveys of bluefish, I believe. Clearly, there's a lot of people that like to go out there and look for fish. So let's sail out past Clark's Point Lighthouse. So that lighthouse, excuse me, does not exist anymore. Once the fort was built out there, Fort Rodman, they actually put the lighthouse on top of the fort. And that was a fort that was designed by Robert E. Lee before the Civil War. So sail out past the point, get a good look at New Bedford Harbor at sunset. And as you might guess, these paintings that I'm showing you come from our collection. So the arrow shows you where I am, and the arrow on the right, which could just be a little bit to the left, would be where the ships would sail out of Nantucket Harbor to get into the Atlantic Ocean. And as people ask here, and we tell them there are hardly ever any whales in Buzzards Bay. If you want to find whales, you have to leave. So if anybody ever tries to sell you a whale watch ticket inside the bay, just run as fast as you can. All right, so we're out of the bay. We're heading past the Quina on this ship called the Niger. And we get towards Nantucket, and I realized that not everybody that's tuned in tonight is on the island, but thought I would include some pieces here from the museum collection, including the portrait of Captain David Upham Coffin, a couple of really nice landscapes by Wendell Macy. And there was even an island steamer named Nantucket. There's a painting of it there. Okay, so give you a sense in terms of absolute location, that is latitude and longitude, as to where you would find the island of Nantucket and Nantucket Sound as compared to the Azores archipelago. I've specifically chosen the island of Fayal because when the ships would sail out of here, sail across the Atlantic, they would typically stop at that island and in the port of Horta. And then just a 30-minute ferry ride now to the other side of it is the island of Pico. You can see similar latitude, but obviously the Azores are much further to the east. So, all right, so here we have a whale ship heading out to go find whales and catch whales, and cut them up and boil them down to turn them into money. But there were some days when they wouldn't see any whales. And this is an interesting phrase, having a gam. So a gam was a conversation that would happen with captains of the ships. If the wives were there, they might, go from one ship to the other. You might also have first mates and second mates joining in the conversation. But it was a chance to get caught up on news. Perhaps if one ship was heading home, they would give them mail to bring home. You might even transship some casks of oil to bring back, especially if the ships were owned by the same person or people. So now the chase is on, and the lore is that sperm whales were first hunted from the east coast of the U.S. here by a ship that had left Nantucket in 1712. And they were off course or wherever they were, but they caught this whale, brought it back, and they found some really interesting oil products in the head that they weren't finding in right whales. And that led to the start of including sperm whales in the whale hunt. And this is a part of a series, and this one obviously is the capture. The whale is just about finished, but it's putting up a fight, and you can see a boat getting flung into the air. So it turns out we have it that there's a piece of art in our collection here that was done on the underside of a bracket fungus. And this one's been somewhat amusingly named fung shaw. So instead of artwork done on a tooth or on pan bone or even on baleen or walrus tusk, this has been done on the underside of what is known as the artist's conch. And you can see the inspiration for it is the image in the middle of the slide. But why were the ships going to the Azores? Well, once you get out of New Bedford Harbor, get into the Atlantic Ocean, get into the Gulf Stream, that current brings you to the Azores. It brings you west. And turns out that the mail ships, the postal ships that were leaving the U.S. to bring mail to England, knew all about this, and the whalers were knowing about it, and the merchant mariners knew about it. And Benjamin Franklin and his cousin Timothy Folger charted this out in the late 1700s. And I noticed recently that the Nantucket Historical Association has one of the originals of this and had it on display several years ago. It's a pretty cool thing to have, because apparently the original was lost for a while and was found rolled up in a tube in a library somewhere in France. But this is a pretty important piece of research here, because it shows that there is a current that naturally flows from southwest to northeast. And this little image here as well will show you that if you follow a certain part of the current, you end up in the Azores Islands. And that's what the chain looks like. Typically, they would see Flotage and Corvu first, but then they would find their way. They would usually, again, go to Horta and go to Pico, whether it was going to Lodge to Pico or the port right across from Horta is called Madalena. And some of you have probably been there already, but if you haven't, if you have a chance to go to Pico, I'm going to put in a plug for their Museum of Whalers there. It's really well laid out, and it's a really attractive site, and they make use of 3 old whaleboat houses and what had been a tent for blacksmith, and made it all into a really lovely museum. And there are whales all around these islands, so whaling happened around the islands, and they kept the ships there for a while. And of course, if you didn't leave the east coast of the US with a full crew, you could pick up people here. There's often guys that were willing to get off the islands, that what if there wasn't much happening in their lives, or they were second, third, fourth in line to inherit the family farm or whatever they had, they just decided, you know what, they're better off on a whale ship. Try something else. The other thing I'll add is the first US consul office overseas was in the Azores starting in 1795. There was one on the island of Fayal, and there was one on the island of San Miguel, and there is still a consul office there in the capital of Ponta Delgado. Some of you may have seen this enormous painting we own. It's 1,275 feet long, 8.5 feet tall, or big rolls of cotton sheeting. And it was painted by these 2 guys, Benjamin Russell, who went whaling for almost 4 years to pay off some family debt, and Caleb Purrington. And they would travel around with this big rolling scroll or scrolls of this artwork and show it off, and give people a sense of what it was like to have to sail around the world to go hunt whales. Excuse me. And this is one of the scenes here where they're off the island of San Miguel hunting sperm whales. And one of the things that I find really interesting, well, 2 things that's interesting about this is that, yeah, it's in color. Like, all the old images are all black and white. So he had no idea what people were wearing, but Russell went whaling. He knew what people wore. So it's interesting to see the colors he remembers people wearing, and then what he was able to depict in the artwork here. And his renderings of ships are really accurate. He was really good with the standing rigging, the running rigging, and just the shapes of everything. See, these guys in the boats are getting close. They haven't quite harpooned anything yet, but the action is just about to begin. And the voyage of this ship actually didn't go to the Azores. So the fact that he was able to paint this so accurately, even though he didn't go there, is rather interesting. So he clearly spoke with people who went there. And he also had a sense that maybe it would be of more interest to people on the East Coast, especially New Bedford, Fairhaven area, if he included the Azores in the painting, as opposed to not showing anything just like missing the Azores and just going straight south and not even showing it. So, probably good to know your audience. And then you'll notice the process here off the islands is a little different, because there are 7 people on these boats. Well, these show 6, but eventually there were 7. And they were launching the boats from the shore. And whether it's a Yankee whaleboat or an Azorean whaleboat, you can step a mast into the front of the boat, put up the mast, put up a sail, and go chase the whales. And once you get close, get the mast and the sail out of the way and then row. And I'll show you a little bit more about this in a few minutes. And again, here's a little more depiction here of hunting of the whales from the shore. The black and white image on the right, they are just launching it right off the beach. So if you're in, I'll point out that these boats did not have a centerboard. So if you were going to sail them, you had to have your counterweight on the opposite rail of, whatever side the sail was, and being full of wind. Otherwise, you would flip this boat rather quickly. They're hard to row when you're rowing them. They're really easy to roll when you're rowing. I'm sorry, when you're sailing them. So, having said all that and having gone to the Azores with those depictions, I had an intern a few years ago take a look through the logbook of a brig called the Sullivan. There's a couple of pictures of it here. These were taken 1905 or so. So this was one of the last ships to be operating out of the city to go whaling. And you notice the entries here starting in June of 1905. So they'd obviously left at least 2 weeks prior to get there, and maybe a week prior, but you can see that they're getting closer. And these are the things that they saw. And the next slide will add some visual context to these words you're seeing on the right side, because the word grampus and diamond fish might not mean anything, or blackfish. And porpoises was a general phrase used for both dolphins and porpoises at the time. And as I had mentioned earlier, they would often stay in the Azores for a bit of time to process what they had, get new crew, get fresh water, maybe get more food before they went back out, because they were going to be out for a while. By the early 1900s, they weren't rounding Cape Horn anymore. They were staying in the Atlantic Ocean. But prior to that, as many of you know, these voyages might last 3 or 4 years, because they've gone around the Horn, gone into the Pacific to hunt whales, and then they came back. So top left, blackfish, also known as pilot whales. Here off our coast, we'd see longfin pilot whales. As you'll see in an image coming up later, they see shortfin pilot whales off the Azores. That big one on top there is the fin whale, second largest of all species, and the biggest one we see around here on Whale Watch. The second one on the left, the one in the middle there with the rounded face, that is harbor porpoise. Below it is the ocean sunfish. The one in the middle, that's the diamond fish, otherwise known as a manta ray. And the squid is obvious, and then grampus on the bottom, I've chosen to put a Risso's dolphin. The Portuguese word for this is grampu. And so grampus was used for Risso's dolphin, it was used for orca, sometimes it was used for pilot whales. I just decided to go down the middle and use the one that translates almost literally. So here in the 2000s, there are still people paying close attention to the whales there. However, the focus is now putting radio tags on them using suction cups typically, and tracking where they go. So these tags communicate with satellites, and then the satellites send the signals back down to the University of Azores Department of Oceanography and Fisheries campus is on the island of Fayal, and that's where Rui Prieto is. So he's able to do his research there. And this one's a good, probably 14, 15 years old, but he had sent this to me shortly after he had finished it, and we had it on display for a while. And it's interesting to see where these animals go. Clearly going north to go find food. All right, so there's this great series of posters that I have that are in Portuguese. So what I've decided to do is I've picked out 4 of them, and I've circled the species that we would expect to see in Nantucket Sound. So the big ones on the left are the three we see around here quite often on whale watches, the minke whale being on top, the fin whale being the one in the middle, and then the one with the very long flippers. That's the humpback whale. And that's the one everybody hopes to see on a whale watch because they're most likely to be acrobatic. Put on a show for people. It was out July 31st. I had family here from Colorado when we went out on a bit of a blustery day from Provincetown, and we only saw 3 humpbacks, but each one of them breached. So we got a treat that day because that rarely happens. Maybe it's because of the weather, but for my family who had never seen a whale, never been on a whale watch before, it was a thrill. So if you haven't been on a whale watch, definitely go. Guessing the closest one for you would be Hyannis Whale Watcher in Barnstable, or head out to Provincetown. You just got to decide, do you want a longer car ride or a longer boat ride? So also showing up in Nantucket Sound on this poster would be sperm whale. And then we have a couple of dolphin species, the common dolphin, and there's the grampus again, the Risso's dolphin. And I had commented early, and I have to say though that it was just last week that an orca who tends to show up every once in a while, has been nicknamed Old Tom, was seen swimming with a bunch of dolphins in Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. And prior to that, there had been some other orcas seen last summer off the coast, off the Cape. So certainly where all of you are, you're much more likely to see something like that than I am here in New Bedford. Matter of fact, if any whale, dolphin, porpoise comes into Buzzards Bay or New Bedford Harbor or Clark's Cove, it's definitely news. And I mentioned earlier about the differences, the fact that in the Azores, they're going to see the short fin pilot whale, whereas around here, we'll see the long fin. And then on the rare occasions, these 2 beaked whales in the bottom, the Cuvier's beaked whale, the one on the left, otherwise known as Zifio in Portuguese, and then the True's beaked whale. These are also possibly seen in Nantucket Sound, and these are species that like deep water, but if they're chasing food, they may find their way into the sound. Cuvier's beaked whale have been tagged fairly often with the digital tags that are attached by suction cups. And there are 2 different whales that have set the record for marine mammal dives. One went down 9,816 feet, and the other one was down for, I think it was 2 hours and 17 minutes. Think about being able to do that as a mammal. I can't hold my breath for 2 minutes and 17 seconds. And one other fun little tidbit about these animals is researchers have found that the beaked whales typically won't start communicating with each other till they get down about 500 feet, because they know in the top 500 feet, more or less, that's where orcas are going to be. So they figure they're a little more predator-free, predator-safe if they don't talk to each other until they get deeper, or they don't even start to send out the clicks to echolocate. So everything on the left side of this poster is a baleen whale. Everything on the right's a toothed whale. And the ones on the right are the ones that echolocate to hunt and to navigate. All whales, dolphins, and porpoises make sounds to communicate, but it's the ones with teeth that do the extra noise so they can find where they're going and find food. So this next poster, the fishes of the Azores, you notice up on top that I've circled everything there. So everything in that tuna group, there's a billfish there, there's the dolphin fish, the mahi-mahi, and then there's a couple of shark species. I'm going to highlight a few others that can be found in Nantucket Sound. So you have a jack on the top and a bonito next to it. That's the greater amberjack. And then we have bluefish. I mean, I think everybody will recognize that one. There's another jack there. That one is called the Almaco jack. So that's found in, or can be found in Nantucket Sound, as can the common sea bream. And I want to point out, the fish below it, in Portuguese, it's a brotia, and in English, it's forkbeard, which sounds like an interesting pirate name. I've had a chance to have that fish for dinner one night in the Azores. It was very tasty. So if you ever happen to see that on a menu and you're there, it's worth trying. But I did look into the other fish in this middle category here, the coastal and the shelf fishes, and there weren't any of those that were found, or whose range was shown as being Nantucket Sound. There are similar species, like you'll find a mullet and other things like that, and different kinds of jack, but not any of these. And then you've got these other ones that can be caught commercially via deep water, and these two Alfonsinos can be found in the sound, as can the oilfish and this other one over here called the wreckfish. And I'd be curious to see, if someone, those of you that have caught any of these or seen any of these, if you would comment on that in the chat. I'd be curious to see that. Okay, so here's another one. These are the great big fishes, and rather than circle everything, I just X'd out the two that you wouldn't see. Not likely to see a whale shark and not likely to see this species of ray. But everything else, all the billfish and those in the tuna family, the lancet fish, the opa, and the ocean sunfish. And if any of you understand Portuguese, you see the word peixe lua. It's kind of funny because that means moonfish. So Portuguese, it's the moonfish, and in English, it's the ocean sunfish. And then you have those four species of shark there: thresher, hammerhead, mako, and blue. And there is some seabirds there. And those three species of shearwater can be seen in the Azores, but also seen over Nantucket Sound. And when we were out on that whale watch a couple of weeks ago, we did see actually all three of these species from the whale watch boat. There are also petrels out there, but they're different species of petrel here than we would have there. Same goes for the gull species. I did circle the two tern species that are also seen here, the roseate and the common. And I'm hoping the audio for this link works, because if you've never heard of Corey's shearwater, this is not going to sound like a bird. I was glad that my first time over there in 2019, we were told you might hear this really weird noise at night. It's not children arguing outside your window. It's a bird. And let's hope the link works. And I think it's that one. Oh. Play that again. And if you're curious to hear more of that, you can look these things up on YouTube. They're really easy to find. And there's some video of them as well. It's just a strange noise. So back to the culture part of things. So I'm lucky enough that there's a group here called the Azorean Maritime Heritage Society, which founded in 1997. And we own 3 Azorean whale boats, like you see in the top left photo there. The one in front, the Bella Vista, that was built on the island of Pico in 1997, was shipped over here. And the guy who made that boat came over. He made the other two called Pico and Fayal. These are both rowed, as you see in that top left photo. And in the photo on the right, they're also sailed. I happen to think this is a fantastic photo. Because the sails are up and these boats are beautiful when they're being sailed. And you can see everybody's against up on the other rail while that sail is full of wind. The island of Pico, the volcanic mountain on the island of Pico was in the background. And it makes for a fantastic photo. And then there's me on the bottom left there. So AMHS has open rows, or if any of you are ever around this area, and you can go onto the website, you can sign up for an open row. We let anybody do 2 rows for free, and if you get hooked, we ask you to join as a member. You can row, you can sail. It really is a lot of fun, and for those who are curious about what that's like to have launched, to be in a boat this low on the water, and then think about how crazy it was to chase whales from these things, and how bold, brave, and crazy the guys were to do this. And sometimes it was just, this is the only way we can make any money on this island. We are going to chase these whales. We are going to bring them back. And I believe I have one more slide, and nice little moonlight whaling scene there. So there's my contact information. That's my work phone. That's my work email. And with that, I will conclude and I will take questions.
Okay, I will come back here, and I think my screen is blurry because I'm using somebody else's computer. Nope, it's better now.
And
Okay.
I'll stop sharing too, I think.
Okay.
Go.
Thank you. That was great. So a few questions for you. When you're working with 19th century whaling logbooks, what's the most unusual or unexpected observation you've come across?
I have colleagues that could give better answers than that because they spend more time with these than I do. But one of our interns was just commenting Tuesday, as we had 3 interns this summer, and they gave their final presentations for us 2 days ago. And one of them commented on finding references to pirates and piracy. So that's an
Okay.
interesting thing to find. And there are entries for, there's always somebody who's been punished for something. And there was one logbook, it was like 2 weeks running. The same guy was still tied to one of the masts, or he was just like kept in quarters down below deck because he would not apologize for something stupid he had done. And there's always comments about, well, no, you're more likely to read in journals about people's comments about the food.
Okay.
Logbooks
Good.
were there for the owners and the agents, because when these things were brought back, the agents and owners would read through them in great detail, just to see how much money they were going to make, but also to plot out the next trip, to know where to send the vessel the next time.
Okay,
The journals
interesting.
probably had more interesting stuff than the logbooks.
Okay, the waters of Nantucket Sound and the Azores share many of the same marine species. Are there any species that are thriving in one region but struggling in the other?
Wow, what a great question.
Right?
And I wish I had a good answer for that. Well, I know that you're much more likely to see sperm whales off the Azores than you are just because of the way the continental shelf drops off around the islands. They're just much more likely to find squid and food there, just be able to dive to find more food than you would off of Nantucket. I wish I had a great answer for that. I guess I don't.
I'm just curious, this isn't a question from the audience, but what's the population of the Azores?
Oh, it's about 250,000 people. I know that Pico and Fayal are each about 13,000 to 14,000 people. The majority of the population is on the island of San Miguel.
Okay.
And the smaller islands have smaller populations.
It's on my bucket list of places, so I will follow up with
Every
you
island,
afterwards
yeah, every island has its own beauty. I've been to 5 of them. No, is that right? 4 of them. And I want to go to all 9. And they're different enough that it's worth visiting every island.
heard wonderful things from friends that have visited, so I look forward to that at some point. Okay, a question. How did Portuguese culture and traditions become so deeply rooted in New Bedford and southeastern Massachusetts through the whaling industry?
So once the voyages were over and the ships came back here, many of these men that, they just decided they're going to stay here because there wasn't anything for them in the Azores. There was minimal opportunity. And there were probably a few that were getting away from conscription into the army or they committed a crime and they didn't want to go back, all those reasons. But they settled here because this is where the ships came in, and they were able to work on the waterfront or to, go back out on the ships. And the folks just kept on coming back and settling here. There was another big push in the early 1900s when the textile mills were built, late 1800s or early 1900s. And those folks came over to work in the textile mills in Fall River and New Bedford. The Rocha part of my family came over in the Rochas came over in 1912, and on the other side of my dad's family, Soas came over in 1917 and 1918 to work in the mills in Fall River. But I know those folks also came to work in the mills here, and the tenements were being built, and they could all live in the same apartment buildings, could all speak Portuguese with each other, could work in the mills together, speaking the same language, set up their stores and do that. And then when the Capelinhos volcano erupted off Fayal in 1958 or 57, and again in 58, and covered half the island in ash, Senator John Kennedy and Senator John Pastore, and there was another one that set up a refugee act to drop some of the quotas to get these people off the islands to come here, so they had a place to live and place to work, because so much of what they had been covered in ash, or people had died, all those things. And those folks settled here as well, and they just kept building up the culture. So it's a combination of whaling, mills, a volcano, and in between, people that are settled here decide, well, let's send for the family. Things are going well. But I also know that there were people that came here and left in the late 1890s and went back because of a depression that happened at that time, and went back to the Azores. It was the case like that for my neighbor across the street, who also happens to have the same last name.
How long was the trip from the Azores here?
Well, so just a couple of months ago, there was a guy who has been doing a global sail. It took him 2 weeks to sail from here to the Azores, totally under sail. I don't think he used his engine at all. So for a 63 foot single masted vessel to sail across, it was 2 weeks. So I figure for a 3-masted bark, it was about the same.
Okay. Tom is asking, are the Azores seeing global warming to the same extent as here on the Cape? Any particular observations of problems there? For example, winds, rains, heat, flooding?
Good question. I wish I had a great answer for that. I would say they probably are. I'm sure they've probably lost a little bit of shoreline to it, because there are some low-lying areas. But I'm sure there are people that could answer that better than I can. I'd rather tell
Okay.
you that than make up an answer.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that. I think everyone else does as well. Okay. If one is an angler going to the Azores, what is the best fish to go for? I heard that there are so many similarities between our marine and avian species, but is there something to try to fish there that we would struggle with here?
Maybe I'll base this on things that I've seen in seafood restaurants and on menus. I mean, there is still quite a bit of, even if you're going out in what you would consider a fishing boat, there's still quite a strong industry of just using a pole to catch things. So you can get tuna, you can get billfish. There's those different species of sea bream. There are some jacks out there in Benito. I'm going to cheat a bit and go back to my poster here. There's some grouper, John Dory, and I know there's a similar fish here after that. But I was in mackerel too. Bluefish, I think, the fishing for that's probably going to be about the same. But the sea bream there seemed to be really, really popular.
Okay.
And definitely
Um,
bluefish.
Okay, another question. Are the Azores part of Portugal or independent?
Great question. So they are considered an autonomous region of Portugal. So they have their own government, they have their own flag, but they still consider themselves part of Portugal. And every island has its own little municipal government as well, which, same here, like every town, every state has their own.
Okay, another question. Of the shared species you mentioned, do we know if individual animals ever travel between Nantucket and the Azores, like we saw on your map of individuals traveling between the Azores and Greenland?
I would guess that sperm whales would. That's the obvious one that comes to mind. I'm going to guess that the shark species do as well because they're a well-traveled fish. And tuna cover a lot of ground. Billfish cover a lot of ground. The jacks and the bonito. So I would say it would be all of those.
Okay. Jeff is asking, balance of trade is getting a lot of attention lately. From your presentation, I can see how the Americas benefited from the whaling industry. How did the Azorians?
Great question. So once folks, well, I should probably answer in two parts. Pre 1894, when prior to Azorian whaling starting on its own with the creation of the first Azorian whale boat. So prior to that, there were certainly shoreside businesses that would supply the whaling vessels. So those folks made out. I mean, people on the island of Pico began to notice what was happening over on Fayal. Said, wait a minute, they're over there making the money, repairing the vessels, repairing the boats, outfitting them, selling them food and water and all of that. We can do that over here too. So so we know they certainly did that. And then once Azorians began to do their own whaling and processing of whales on, and there are several shoreside factories, several of which have become museums now. And, they all had a ramp that would go from the shore, big winches, pull these whales out of the water, kind of like a factory ship would do, and then process them there. And several of those have been turned into museums. Prior to all that happening, they would turn the whales into a variety of products, just like factory ships did. And they were typically they were selling almost all of this to Europe. Germany and England were buying a lot of the products. And
Okay.
then people don't eat a whole lot of whale over there. It seems like sperm whales aren't very tasty because there's so much myoglobin in the muscle that makes them kind of have a bit of a weird flavor. They'll eat dolphin and porpoise, and there's plenty of fish around there to eat. But they would also be able to turn some of the bone. So they were creating fish meal and fertilizer, and they would use some of the oil on the islands, of course, for themselves, but they were also able to sell it to the markets in Europe.
Okay. Phil is asking, when we go to the Azores, what fish dishes would be best to order?
Yeah, I would say definitely try the fork beard. And the Portuguese is spelled Abrotea, Abrotea. I've had sea bream there, it was good. And several of the restaurants, they'll have this fresh fish that they've just taken out of the water sitting on ice. So you can just walk up to it and point to it and say, I want that one. And
And how are they prepared? Like, what's a popular preparation for fish?
you tell them how you want it, but they will usually they'll certainly gut it. I mean, or it's already gutted, and they can just grill it, fillet it. You want it boiled, they'll do that too. But I think it's much better when it's grilled,
Yep.
sautéed.
I would.
And so I've done that on Teseda, San Miguel. Actually, the 4 islands I've been to, I've just pointed to the fish. I said, I want to try that one. Or I'll ask somebody, what did you have? What do you like? Because they live there or they've been there before as a tourist, or they just eaten something really, really good and they say, yeah, try this.
I bet it's all good if it's fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, last question here. For people who want to connect more deeply with Portuguese heritage in our region, what are some resources or places you recommend visiting?
Well, certainly, you know, a we welcome anybody that would like to come here to New Bedford, the Clark's Cove, and go for a row or a sail in an Azorean whaleboat. So look for Azorean Maritime Heritage, Azorean Maritime Heritage Society. UMass Dartmouth has a fantastic Center for Portuguese Studies and the Ferreira Mendes Library. There are resources there that are rather extensive. New Bedford Public Library also does. And we have some here too, but there are certainly some that we made sure that they got over at UMass Dartmouth. And I believe Bridgewater State also has some good resources there, as well as Bristol Community College.
I've got another question. I misspoke when I said it was the last one. The Azorean portion of that large scroll painting you highlighted was beautiful. You said it was much longer with other scenes. Where can we see the entire scroll?
Great question. So I'm 99% certain that on the Whaling Museum website, you can find, so look for Grand Panorama. You probably don't even need to put Grand Panorama of a whaling voyage around the world. And the two artists are Benjamin Russell and Caleb Purrington. You should be able to find that on the website. I know, pretty sure we did a YouTube recording of a presentation once. You can find it there. Or if you want to come here and sit, and we have it scrolling on a big screen, you sit on a nice comfy couch and you can watch it. And it travels occasionally. Yeah, there it is. Fantastic. It's right now at the Minnesota Marine Art Museum, and they have one section on a roll, and they move it every 2 or 3 weeks. So you give your members a chance to see the section, come back 3 weeks later, see the next section. We will never set it up again so that it's constantly scrolling. It's just too much stress on the cotton. We had it on display once in 2018. We rented a mill space that was about 400 feet long, and we had the 4 sections up, and you could just walk the whole length and go around it. We are in the process of knocking. So we bought the lot across the street from our front door a couple of years ago. The site work has just started. And if I were to venture a guess, I would say in 2 years, there will be a new building up, and the top floor of that is just going to be gallery space. And one of the things factored in was, if we would ever put the panorama up again, could we fit it all up there at once? So it's entirely possible we'll put it on display again. But in the meantime, find it on the website, find it on YouTube. And the Whaling Museum does have a YouTube channel.
Do you want to mention your website one more time just before we wrap up?
Sure. So it's as obvious as you might expect, www.whalingmuseum.org. And I think it would be under the Explore tab.
Okay, great. Well, this was fascinating. It made me want to go to the Azores even more than I already wanted. So I will contact you and get some recommendations when I do end up going. So thank you so much. And just before we wrap up, I just wanted to say the upcoming webinars we have on October 9th. We have guest speaker Kristen Smith at the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy in Chatham, talking about white sharks in our waters. And then going forward to January, on Thursday, January 22nd, we have Carolyn Teppold from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution talking about the invasive green crab in Nantucket Sound and beyond. So if you'd like to register for any of those, go to saveoursound.org/ACONS, which again is a celebration of Nantucket Sound. If you have any questions about the Alliance, our mission, the designation of Nantucket Sound as a National Historic Landmark, feel free to reach out to me at audra@saveoursound.org. So thanks for joining us. Thank you again, Robert, and hope to see you at the next webinar.
Thank you all and thank you again for the invitation to do this. It was really a lot of fun.
Great. We appreciate your time. All right. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Take care.